Hi, everyone. Welcome to Table 21, episode number 1. Been wanting to do this for a while. We started creating content. You might have seen it come by talking about what Piecemeal does and some of the new stuff we've done. But I wanted a platform to go and talk to industry people, whether they're small producers, whether they're restaurateurs, whether they're consultants, whatever they can bring to the hospitality business and to have different points of views. And I'm really, really excited to say that today, I think that we scored really big by having Jensen Cummings for the first episode of Table 21. Now, I'll definitely let him talk about what he does, but Jensen is a chef, a cicerone, and he'll correct me if I'm saying this wrong, a podcaster, consultant. His family has been, I keep telling people, I've been in the business 27 years, I think 28 as of July this year. His family's been in the restaurant industry for 115 years. So I got to hear what it was like to grow up. I got in the business in my teens. I got to hear what it was like to be born. And without any further ado, I want to bring on board Jensen. How are you, man?
I'm doing really well. Thank you so much. It's cicerone, but
Cicerone. Okay.
I like the enthusiasm that you had for saying it. I appreciate that.
If you say things with confidence, sometimes if you say confidently, it sounds like you know what you're talking about sometimes.
100%. It's a beer sommelier. Basically, I have fancier words for describing beer so that my habit is a hobby turned into a profession,
I have a lot. I'm deeper in the wine. I'm discovering the beer. I'm deeper in the wine stuff. And all my really, really great sommelier friends, they tell me, it's a good way of justifying a habit that you have of drinking too much wine, right? So, and I'm excited because as I was reading your bio, I know you've done some really cool things with some. Anyways, you worked on some fun things, mixing food with beer, and I didn't even understand the whole thing, but I hope that you can enlighten us in that. But yeah, like I was saying in the intro, your family has been in hospitality for 115 years. Can you just give us a bit of background as to what that is and how you got into it?
Yeah, fifth consecutive generation. I think it's 120. Yeah, it's 120 years now. You got to update that bio. Yeah. So in 1900, my great-great-grandfather opened La Fond House, French family, Parisians back, and we even have some ties to restaurants on the Parisian side. Fond is the French sauce of taking pan drippings and deglazing and reducing. So even the name was very much like a miller used to be a miller and a smith was a blacksmith. Yeah. We definitely were in the hospitality industry before that as well. But 1900 in Little Falls, Minnesota, called La Fond House. I've only seen pictures of it. And it's old-timey saloon, right? Like guy playing the organ piano with the bowler cap and, Wyatt Earp shot somebody out front. Like that kind of vibe, absolutely. And then the family kind of went in two directions. The French family were Acadians, right? So and they went down and ended up in Lafayette, Louisiana, and started what is Cajun culture and cuisine there, massive. And then the other went the northern route and ended up going through, and you have places like Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, that are kind of big hotbeds of French culture. And then my family ended up in San Francisco. My great-grandfather and grandfather had restaurants and bars in San Francisco. My three uncles own restaurants across the country: California, Iowa, Florida. These are my dad's younger brothers. And even my younger brother is in the industry as well. He's a sushi chef. He worked for me in Denver for quite a few years. And we always joke that my dad, whose sons and brothers are incredibly talented and accomplished in the industry, my dad can't boil an egg to save his life. I don't know. We talk about skipping generations. It just skipped the oldest boy for some reason. But that was the background. And so, we can dig in that a little deeper if it's interesting.
Your uncles were more like the operators and the people in the business, I believe, right?
They started in California and then moved to Iowa, Ames, Iowa, which is where my wife Betsy's from. She's a Cyclone. College football is huge there. But they found college town, a small college town, as kind of the breeding ground. And this is a model. 1984, they opened their first restaurant. And this is a model now that the Chipotles and a lot of the QSR fast casuals have really adopted, right? It was college towns. You think of Denver and Boulder, Colorado. You think of Columbus, Ohio. A few of these hotbeds for innovation around QSR, fast casual, multi-unit concepts started in college towns because it was quick, it was affordable, it was cool, it had a vibe to it, it was potentially international. And so they definitely understood the college town mentality at really early on in the game. You know,
yeah. It's funny. I was listening to a podcast this week, more about innovation in tech, but it was with one of the founders of Zappos.
Oh yeah.
And he was saying that they had a fun thing. You're going to dig this. It's called Acquired, is the podcast. And so it's basically very tech focused, which is kind of stuff being from hospitality, but now being in tech with Piecemeal, I try to connect to some of that stuff. But
I like it.
There was a pizza place. So the students would basically operate it for a year. They would get a contract, but he was buying full pizzas instead of slices and then selling them on the floors for a profit. And that's how he met the guy from Zap. But actually, him and the other guy started eventually.
And then you get acquired by Jeff Bezos and Amazon. No big deal.
Exactly, right, for a pretty dollar. But when they moved to California, and before they started Zappos, or they got involved in that, they wanted to do Tony Chan wanted to do a Subway on campus at Stanford, and it was illegal. You couldn't do it. They wouldn't. Now it's everywhere, but back then it wasn't, right? So even your uncle in '84, and I guess the guys from Zappos in the early 2000s, they were like, let's get us close to campus. They wanted to be on campus, but they wouldn't let like corporate or other outside brands go and do it. So it shows how it evolves, and it's actually a funny story as we move forward with yours, that how you've been ahead of the curve with certain things as well, right? That but
sometimes too far. We'll talk about that.
We'll talk about that in a bit.
Which has served me well and led to a lot of frustration and failure. We'll dig into that. The college scene was why I ended up going. I graduated high school in Southern California, very much like had that Southern California lifestyle and got in a lot of trouble, was definitely a troubled teen. And
long blonde hair, surfing, I'm guessing, looking at them, kidding.
Skater. I was more the skater punk kid, causing trouble, like hoodlum for sure.
You were perfect for the restaurant business then.
I found my tribe. And so one of my uncles, Rick Karmer, who owns iconic places in Ames, like Wallabies, where I started my career, started in '88. USA Today has them as like the number 35 sports bar in the country, scratch cooking, like really, really cool place. And I was like, what am I going to do with my life, so to speak? And he said, why don't you come out for the summer, hang out, I'll put you to work a little bit, chase college girls and do that whole thing. I was like, sure, whatever. And I washed dishes. I think after the first week, I was like, these people are totally crazy. I love it. I'm in. I was so in the hazing, the energy, the bravado, just the intensity of it. It all fueled so much of my strengths and weaknesses and character strengths and flaws. Yeah. And so I was in all the way. 17-year-old kid, went from dishwasher to like running the line in a year, opened multiple concepts for my uncles out there, went to culinary school, learned front of house and did bartending and serving. I wanted it all. So it was really, really great. And the college atmosphere, definitely, there was a tremendous vibe there. And also just like, you found people that were just finding their way. And I think in the restaurant industry, you often come across people that are searching for something. And it's why it's such a transient business as well. It's why so many people are doing this until they get the real job. But that's one of the things that I didn't grow up in restaurants. I grew up always with restaurants, being connected to our family and visiting the restaurants, but it wasn't like my family owned the restaurants, right? And I was washing dishes when I was 7 years old, or I was, shucking fava beans as like a young kid. However, I never got when are you going to get a real job? We're going to be very into air quotes apparently today, Chris. Real job, because my family had been pretty successful at it. They're all entrepreneurs on both sides of my family. And so I felt very liberated in saying I could pursue this, where other people are always like, I'm doing this for now, and we're half pregnant, to quote Gary Vee. That was an important kind of dynamic there.
It's funny that you're bringing him up, because I was going to bring him up later. So we'll get back to that. Some of the stuff you've been doing, I'm like, somebody's been watching Gary Vee.
Oh, yeah. And when we talk about starting the podcast, we'll get into that again.
I'll tell you my interaction with Gary Vee one time on a call like this, and what he told me, and you've applied it perfectly. So, but we'll get back to that when we talk about the pod. Quick segue. You mentioned, obviously, you're into beer. You're a beer guy. But I'm sure you're a all good stuff kind of guy. You said you bartended. I'm curious. I got to ask. I was a bartender for years. I love mixing drinks. What's your favorite? What's your go-to drink?
If I'm going light and I want a little pinky out from a cocktail, I like the aviation cocktail. I like the gin. I like the creme de volette. And then, I mean, honestly, even any iteration with different base spirits, the old fashioned, so lemon instead of cherry and orange. It's just such a clean, pure cocktail that I'm big on. You can tell I'm into spirituous cocktails for sure.
What kind of bourbon? What are you showing there?
It depends. Are you buying?
Of course I'm buying. Let me guess then. Pappy or something, right?
I'm really into the guys from Willet right now. I think their 12-year is phenomenal. I think it's underpriced for sure. I've gotten to interact with the Pappy Van Winkle crew a few different times and had a bottle of hold on, let me make sure I get the name right. It was 25-year distiller's cask. So basically it was single barrel selected that was put in a bottle that was in a hand carved wood case with glassware that my friends at the Bull and Bush Brewery, speaking of, they've been there, legends, they've been there for a long, long time. We're good friends with them. They were using their barrels before it was cool. They were buying their bourbon before it was cool. And so they had a good relationship with them. And so we got to drink this. Blew my face off for sure. I don't know why I went down that tangent, but when we're speaking bourbon, it always comes up. But Willet, I think, is a really, really great product for sure. And then I lean towards heavier on the rye. If something ends up having like 8, 9, 10, 12% rye as a bourbon, still 51% corn, I'm into it.
Nice. Good stuff. I'm discovering a lot of bourbons. A few years ago, fell on Woodford Reserve, which I thought was really good. And funny, but all my sommelier friends, we love to do, blind tastes and like, okay, what is this? And they were completely off. They weren't a bourbon at all. With Woodford, like some like cognac, I've got all kinds of stuff coming out. But it's a really interesting world. And we have a friend, Murray, not to name him, but based in Ottawa, who's doing a lot of stuff corporately for a big chain in Canada. And we bought him. He said he had stopped drinking bourbon because it was making him a little bit wild when he drank bourbon. But we bought him a nice bottle of bourbon for his birthday, like 5-6 years ago. And last time we FaceTimed during COVID, he had a whole shelf of like, I guess he's got like 40 different brands now. So I guess he's gotten deep in it. But
started an obsession there.
It's I can't wait to visit and have a little barbecue and get myself a little headache in there for sure.
Those are good friends to have.
Of course. I'm sure you're the same way, but I have some really good friends with some nice bars and some nice cellars at home that we can go and dip in once in a while.
Yes, and when you're the expert, especially on the beer side, but I was a wine sommelier as well coming out of school. That's lapsed now, and I didn't. But I do a lot of wine travel, a lot of wine drinking, sake. I am a student of flavor. I'm a fanatic for flavor. And I'm always cataloging. So when people go out with me, food and beverage, they're like, no, you don't order. Jensen orders all the things that are mission critical to have to truly understand. And he literally takes 1 bite, 2 sips, whatever that is, because I'm just cataloging flavor and experience for me. It's very much for me. So I'm very studied on it. I've also gotten very good at giving comprehensive feedback. So people a lot of times are coming to me asking me like, hey, will you taste this and give us your feedback? Because I'm honest and they know that I have a ton of experience and I'm thoughtful about it. And so this schnoz here, this French schnoz, it's not just for show. It does work. Let me tell you.
I agree. Oh yeah. And it's funny. I was gonna go and ask you about wine, but we can go back. But sake is something I'm discovering. Through Piecemeal, I had the opportunity to go do a pitch competition in Hong Kong last November, pre-COVID, but right in the riots. Like it was limit to where my wife wasn't gonna let me go. I say wife, we're not married, but with 2 kids, a kid and another one coming next month, I think that, it qualifies as my wife. But so I'm in Hong Kong and meet some friends that have a really beautiful restaurant there called Yardbird. If you're ever in Hong Kong, you have to try Yardbird. It's a yakitori. They do, chicken 40 different ways.
Yeah, I know Yardbird.
You know Yardbird? So I was at Yardbird. Well, there's a kid originally from Calgary, right? The family. So Stacy and now because I want to say it, her sister, I forget, and chef. Anyways, met the crew there. I forget his name. Chef. Yeah, exactly. And they dragged me after my dinner at Yardbird. They said, we're going to our friend's sake place. And the guy's a sake sommelier. And they produce with a guy who does sake in Japan. They do a whiskey now through their branding at Yardbird. But we sat there and there was like sake everywhere. It literally felt like a movie. It was a dark room in a weird shopping mall. And it was it was a really cool experience. And then
like Bill Murray in Lost in Translation, just in a whole nother world. Talking about Japanese food, whiskey, sake, that's like 3 podcasts in and of themselves.
Exactly, right? If we go deep. But I tasted, I believe it was 20 or 25-year-old sake. It was completely brown. It was umami. It was like nothing I'd ever tasted in sake. And quite the experience for sure. So I believe I'd follow you and I'd let you order. I'd be curious to know. what kind of stuff we'd be tasting. I have a really good friend, Paul, who when we go out and try a new restaurant, we just order one of everything on the menu and share. Like if we go 7-8 people, and if it's too much, then we'll which one should we skip? But like we'll just throw everything in the middle and really go for a tasting. So I think
I'm usually like, give me your best. If I know there's something I need to try, if there's certain techniques or certain items that I know like challenge somebody's ability, I'll order those items. Scallops is a big one. If somebody can cook scallops well, I have trust and confidence in their ability to handle seafood across the board. And then I lean on, which is why communication from back of house to front of house and being on brand, on message is so important to me. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure, a little bit more as well, because I'm going to be the one that says, what do you recommend? And I'm actually going to order exactly what you tell me, because it's important for me to understand what you have confidence in. And
what you want to put forward. Yeah, exactly. What you want to
do. My best. This represents us, because I want the experience. Because at this point, I've had every dish. It's unlikely. There's plenty of things I haven't had, of course, but it's unlikely you're going to put something in front of me that I have no context to understand whatsoever. And so what I want is why it's important to you, why it's you on that plate. Because for me, a big pillar of what we talk about on the show is it's not what's on the plate, it's who gets it to the plate that truly, truly matters. And so I want to understand how you're expressing yourself, how you're going to communicate what you're passionate about, what you're skilled on and in, and the experience that you want me to have when I'm here. And so I can order off the menu, or I can put myself in your hands. And Anthony Bourdain talks about that a lot. Cooking is about control and dining is about submission. So I very much want to be walking the line between those two things at all times.
I did service for years, and when the guests that you build rapport with tell you, you order for us, right? Pick the wine, pick the food. Like for me, I'm getting goosebumps just saying that. Like this is so much fun to know that I will execute and I will create that experience for you. And not to put you on the spot, you said you've eaten everything, but even before you said that, I was thinking, I'd be surprised if you did, but I'm reading a book right now, and I'd forgotten about that. We talked about Japanese food and seafood. Have you ever had fugu?
I've had fugu. Yes. In LA, I had fugu. You know what? It's
overrated, or? Of course.
There's zero chance that the product and what you're eating can equal the anticipation and hype and buildup. There's just zero chance of it. It's a bucket list item for sure. It's a story that you tell for sure. Yet the flavor of that, there's 72 other things, other fish that those chefs have access to that are exponentially better when it comes to the flavor experience from it. But having that level of goosebumps and not in your stomach, it's an experience in and of itself. It very much was less dining and more roller coaster. The clack, 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 clack before we go down.
Right?
That's my mouth. Now, when I think of Japanese cuisine, my grandmother is from Kyoto, Japan. And she would always bring all kinds of weird food. I told you, I don't know what the air quotes say, but weird food over in these tiny little containers. And she would have things that now, a lot of things, the umeboshi and different uguzuke, different pickles and things like that I'm really into now. But a lot of it at the time, I was like, this just smells weird. It's funky. And I'd be embarrassed if other kids came over and it smelled like, soy sauce and fish sauce and fermentation. But she did bring natto over. The snot-like fermented soybeans, I still cannot do them. I revisit them every once in a while. I just stick the schnoz in there and go, nope, still can't.
Not happening.
Still can't.
10 years and see where we're at. But did you see the two? I've been in Asia twice. I went to Taiwan a couple of years ago, and I was in Hong Kong last year. They're quite adventurous as far as what they'll eat. For a little Canadian boy who's been in the hospitality and tried a lot of stuff, but that's not necessarily the most adventurous. Did you see the two crazy guys that are doing these videos on Facebook where they're basically tossing seafood on a boat, and they're at one point he's trying to throw an eel in there, and it's funny. It's fighting out, and he's putting a cover, and he's putting soy sauce and mirin or whatever, all kinds of stuff, and they finish and they start eating these. Anyways, it's crazy. It's funny
because in Asia they're probably adventurous. They're wow, those people put plastic in a jar and call it cheese and squirt it into their mouth. That's the nastiest thing I could ever imagine. For us, we're well, that's America's contribution to gastronomy. Apparently,
I had that. I think I was 14 years old in somewhere in New Hampshire on the beach, and my mom, we're on vacation. She bought this little can of cheese, and I discovered
air quotes, cheese, letters, definitely not cheese.
I discovered eating that I could die, right? So
you talk about traveling to Asia. We have plans in the works now because I've never been to Japan. My two younger sisters have both been. All of my female cousins have been. It was a very interesting thing. My family being from Kyoto, which for people that don't know, was the original capital of Japan before it moved to Nippon, which became Tokyo. And my family were kimono makers for the emperor, and they were entrepreneurs. They were craftsmen, salesmen, and it was interesting because my family has a Shinto temple that later turned into almost like a bed and breakfast. My grandmother was the black sheep. She was the rogue child, right? She moved to America, and her two sisters stay, and we have family there. She came from a family that bound her feet, which was very traditional. So she has tiny little feet and kind of walks this little pigeon-toed walk, was the way she was. So she very much was the rebel. And so there was a little bit of the patriarchy that she was pushing back against. And so she always took the females of our family and not the males. I didn't understand that it was a little bit of a political statement for her ongoing through her life. Yeah. And I remember when family would come, this is very Japanese. She would say, my family is going to ask you to come visit. They're going to invite you 3 times, and 3 times you have to graciously decline. And literally they asked 3 times, and 3 times I declined. It's very awkward and strange, but very Japanese. And the reasoning that she gave was, by the time I was 12, she's like, you're too big. I was like, what do you mean? You're too big, and you won't fit on the beds, you won't this and that, and it'll like bring shame to our family. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. This is crazy. But it very much was that. And at a certain point, it became respect that my younger brother, as I mentioned, is a chef as well, and very much embedded in sushi. And we have not visited Japan or our family in Japan. And so when my grandmother passed away last year, now the conversation is happening. You know, her ashes were supposed to be returned by my mother and my sister. And my brother and I are like, can we come now? Or like, so anyway, there's a little bit of a missing link for me personally when it comes to just heritage and culture, but cuisine. I mean, the Japanese they're just the best. Some of the best French bakeries in the world are in Japan, in Tokyo, because they have a model of, we take what somebody else does and we make it better. Yeah. And I really love that. I think of the quote of like, you know, great artists or good artists borrow, great artists steal, or originality is remembering what you heard but forgetting where you heard it. I'm really good at that one. So the Japanese are some of the best at that for sure.
Do you know Martin Picard, famous chef from Montreal, Pied de Cochon? He's been on Bourdain shows many times. Usually when Bourdain came to Montreal, he would go the Pied de Cochon.
Yeah.
So Martin has a sugar shack now, which is very popular in Quebec, maple syrup, and he's really re-put maple syrup on the map here. And his dream was going to Japan, so for his 50th. So he's got a TV show that's been on for years where they follow their activity, and you know, the sugar shack became a farm where they farm pig and other kinds of stuff, and vegetables and fruit and veggies and stuff like that. And so for his 50th, he took a month by himself in Japan, but obviously brought the TV crew with him because, you know, we might as well create some good content while we're there. But then he went to meet some amazing chefs and bakers and stuff like that, and brought them maple syrup from here, but also showed how much there is a lot of maple syrup being sold there, and how much, like you said, they're doing great things with it, right? So they take a basic product, which is I guess most of the production is from Quebec here, a little bit in Vermont, and there's probably some elsewhere, but there's a ton of it being produced here. But it was pretty interesting to see him go see these high-end chefs and have him play around with maple syrup. Where it replaces honey, but the consistency and the sugar content is different. Anyway, so it's pretty interesting to see how that is. And it actually teased me and made me want to visit Japan that much more, right? I'm always curious to see everything, but those few shows where he was in Japan were really, really interesting. If we keep going, you mentioned before we segued into all that great stuff, culinary school, you become a chef. You do some sommelier stuff in there, so you're a chef. And then after a couple of years of, if I remember, you work obviously in many places, but you worked for a specific brand where you worked on some openings. But then you had the crazy idea that everybody has in 2013 that you want to open your own restaurant, and you want to put a special spin on that, and you want to have a special concept, and you want to do the chef thing where you push really hard. You want to tell us a bit about how how that came about, and maybe some of the lessons you learned in that whole process.
Absolutely. So in 2011, 2012 into 2013 was really when my career was really taking off, starting to grow, big name in the Denver market, even some international stuff and competitions and winning awards, things like that. And so like I was becoming the chef in the brand, which a lot of upside to that, but it also started to cloud my judgment and think that I was hot shit, right? And so there's a lot of challenges there. When we talk about the podcast, it'll come to light there. So in that time, the opportunity to start opening restaurants came. People started, investors. There was a lot of money in the market, and Denver was booming at that time. Absolutely. It was very much becoming on the map, and there wasn't a lot of saturation. So they were looking for leaders in that. So, the opportunity to be like, here's $1 million to open a restaurant, conversations came up. And I'm like, I'm 27 years old. I don't know what $1 million means. And so those opportunities coming about. And then an interesting thing happened. Fast casual, quick service was starting to emerge at that point in the way that chefs were getting involved, right? That it was truly somebody who was a chef, who had a chef brand name, was getting into that space. And I was very fascinated with that. And I thought, what if we create the opportunity to actually go fast casual, because there's money and you can replicate that model and you can drop 19.257% to the bottom line, not 7%, and use that to fuel the really geeky multi-course tasting menu, my dream restaurant type stuff, instead of the reverse. Is mostly what happens is people struggle and have the small boutique, like really niche restaurant, and after a while finally are saying, cool, like now I want to sell frozen burritos because I want to make some money, like that stuff. We tried to go the other way. And so we were looking out in the market, like what's happening in LA and New York especially that's interesting in that is needed in the Denver market. And the meatball shop in New York, Michael and Dan, those guys were just killing us. Like, we need something like this. Yeah. And so we opened the Slotted Spoon Meatball Eatery in 2013 in Denver, near Denver University, which is where the first Chipotle started. Yep. And we actually, funny story, we were this close to signing the lease at the location right across, literally 75 feet from the front door of the original Chipotle. Nice. And this is a lesson to be learned. Location, location, location. People mostly think it's about traffic. It's about the lease and your landlord. It's lease, landlord, location. That's what the 3 L's actually are, because it was a very bad lease. It was a landlord not willing to make the concessions that we needed. Things like if we couldn't get a liquor license, that we would not be on the hook for rent until that was able to pass. And so we walked away from it and opened up Slotted Spoon in 2013. A couple takeaways from that. One, the challenge that I took on was like, how do I be a chef? How do I make everything from scratch? How do I be thoughtful in my purchasing? How do we have a dynamic brand? All the things that were important to me, but do it for $10 a person, food out in 5 minutes, and be able to do 472 people a day consistently with college kids working there, right? That was the challenge. So I took on that challenge because that's what really fuels me, is the challenge of like accomplishing that. And we did an amazing job of that. We were dropping 19.2% to the bottom line. We had lines out the door. We had consistency. We also did something that even a lot of farm-to-table restaurants don't do. We actually spent food in considerable percentage. 57% of our food dollar was spent on local products. And that's a really high number for any restaurant, let alone fast casual, that again is $10 to $12 per person to fit that model. Several challenges to that, and this will be interesting to you. Friction. We needed to find ways to reduce friction, and we didn't do a very good job of that in a couple ways. Our menu was entirely too complicated. It was not simple. It was not intuitive. It was not user-friendly. And the reason for that is because we took too much from Chipotle and didn't understand what Chipotle was accomplishing that we would not. The idea of customization was massive in the market. Massive. Everyone was like, how do we allow our product to be customizable so everybody can create their own perfect little dish? Yeah. The reason that it works at Chipotle is because you can visualize it. You point at the white thing, the red thing, the green thing, or the brown thing and say, I want that, that, that. We had a menu board that did that. Pick your meatball. Do you want the pork or the chicken or the fish? or the vegetarian. Pick your vessel. Do you want the sandwich or the pasta or the salad, right? And pick your toppings, your sauce. And by the end of it, people were like, I don't even know what I'm building here because I don't have the understanding of the context to be able to put together this dish. And people were afraid that they would make a mistake.
Yeah.
And so on the other side of the menu, we had 8 items that were like, I built dishes for people. Here's like the Philly cheesesteak. It's the beef meatball with the grilled onions and stuff like that.
That was probably 70% of sales.
68.5.
Okay, cool. I'm pretty close.
You know what I mean? Like pretty damn close. We luckily had enough staff that we really trained up on that to the point I made earlier, where guests did allow them to make the experience for them, and they all had their kind of customized things. And we spent a lot of money on staff being able to mix and match and play and create their own unique things. So they had their own signature stuff, almost like secret menu type thing. So that part we did really well. The 8 dishes went really well. About 9 months in, we finally, and this is an interesting thing of how you develop partnerships. I'll touch on that right after. But finally, we went to 75% of the menu was like, here's all the things we think are good. Pick the chicken or the fish meatball, but that's it. That's the only choice you have to make. I created dishes that were like substantially good if you did the chicken or the fish. You couldn't really mess it up. And then people could add their own additional toppings if they wanted to, but the dish was fairly well set. And that worked really well. The problem was we didn't understand that soon enough. And so we really struggled financially at that point because after 6 months, you're not new anymore. And we didn't recognize that we were going to have a drop off because we were too complicated. And that was a huge challenge for us. And
it's hard to get back to, right? Once people have that perception that they don't know exactly, what they want, then regaining them takes time, money, and
it takes time and a lot of money. And partnership is massively important. And when you go into partnerships, the number one thing that I'm focused on now is vision. You need to have aligned, shared vision, because my 2 business partners, still friends, amazing operators, mostly focused front of house and then business side. And then I was culinary and some of the marketing. Yet we didn't have aligned vision. It very much became me versus the 2 of them. Yeah. And things like the menu, I wanted the whole menu. I want to make the whole menu. I don't want the guests to make the menu. I want to make the menu. There was a little bit of foresight on my part and a little bit of ego, thinking that I could make the best dish. It turned out I was right. Yet for them, they're like, no, people want to customize. They want to make their own thing. And I was like, I just don't think it's the way that you guys think it's going to go down. And so I got outvoted, and that was a challenge. The other thing was I wanted the first location to feel very genuine and to feel a little bit raw and real. And I wanted beer on tap and a couple little things that, we might not do at location 3, 5, 27, or 34, but to build that community in the beginning was important. And I was kind of outvoted. It was very clean, super minimalist. It looks really, really great. The problem was actually that people walked in and go, is this a chain? And in that interaction, we lost the opportunity to be of the market, for the people in the market. And that is a huge distinction, that you want to feel clean and polished, but people need to buy into you and to help build you up. And because we were already so clean and polished at the beginning, they already felt like we were a chain. It already felt like we didn't need them.
Yeah.
If your guest doesn't feel needed, that's a huge vulnerability. And so we recognize that. So those are a couple of things that I learned from that first full ownership, because I had profit sharing, some points on other places, but that was the first one, being an owner operator. I learned a ton that I applied and still apply today.
I think, and Table 21, this show I'm doing, I want it to be conversations, but I also, like you, I'm an educator at heart, and I want to, get information out of it. I think it's worth kind of, before we move on to the next subject, to there's a couple of things there that are really important.
Yeah, let's dig into them. Let's get as many others as you'd like.
Yeah, that's right. So people always say location, location, location. You said lease, landlord, location. And that ties in also to me talking about lease and landlord and that relationship. Yeah. And you talked about your relationship with your partners, probably a communication breakdown. You said at the beginning, right? You got a little clouded over the attention you were getting. Right. You were right, but maybe the way you communicated that, didn't come out quite as as good as it would today with you being able to look back and what you've learned in the last 7-8 years. But I tell people all the time, you make money when you sign the lease, right? I've been doing consulting before Piecemeal for the last 10 years. You do some as well. I've shut myself in the foot because I will not take it, and I don't do it anymore, but I wouldn't take a contract if I wasn't bringing value. And I had a very nice opportunity to work with a group, and I said, send me your lease. And I said, do not sign that lease. And I broke down, this was like, $10, $15, $20,000 contract of me supporting them in their opening. And, it's good money. It's a good, if you do a couple of those a year, your business is doing well. Yeah. But I basically flat out refused that contract because I said, if you sign that lease, there's no way you can be successful and I will have failed you. So please do not sign this lease. So if the lease doesn't make sense, in their case, it was fees going up. It was not being able to have a patio when everybody else around them had a patio. So that relationship with the landlord right away was not beneficial to them. It wasn't a win-win. I think in life, it needs to be win-win. And in this case, it wasn't, right? So even if a location is great, and that was their point, it was a new area that was being built. There's new condos, new people. But, and you made a really good point about how the 3Ls are not necessarily location 3 times, but.
No, it's just a different paradigm. We're thinking about things too linear and too transactional in the industry at every level all the time. And to your point, the whole game that we're in is humans and communication. It's relationships and communication, right? And we forget that. We think that, again, what's on the plate is what matters. It's not. It's not. We are communicators, pure and simple. We happen to use food and beverage as the medium to communicate. The more we understand what game we're actually in, the better opportunity we have to unlock our ability within the game that we're playing. And I think that's an important distinction that we don't make enough in restaurants. And so we look at the location. We had the same thing. Here's an interesting thing to look out for. We look at all the numbers, visibility, traffic, demographics, right? These different things that are studied within the industry to understand what's happening. The problem is you're understanding what's happening now, and usually you don't have the depth of context to understand what it actually means. So I'll give you a very specific example. We were in a shopping center with a grocery chain, the biggest grocery chain here in the market. And they are the #1 in Colorado and #3 in the region when it comes to revenue. So we were like, this is an amazing location because so many people are shopping here. We're going to have all the visibility. We're going to have all the traffic, right? Yeah. They're affluent. They have money. The demographics are there. What we come to find out, and this is communication, I literally at one point go, I don't buy these numbers. Of course, we had already signed the lease. We already had raised $500,000. We're already in it. We're already up Schitt's Creek, Chris. Yep. And we go, you know what? I'm going to go talk to somebody. I talked to like a junior manager, and I was like, hey, I hear you guys are like the #1 grossing. Like, can I ask you a couple questions about that? And she goes, sure, yeah. And I asked her a few questions because turns out what I'm actually good at is asking questions, which is why I have a podcast. Yep. And what I find out is they actually serve the least number of people to the revenue generated. What that means is people cook more in that area. Yeah. Less people are spending more money at the grocery store because they are buying food to cook for themselves. So if you are a restaurant that is capitalizing on the opportunity to have people dine out more, and you are in a market, in an area, in a community, in a neighborhood where people cook more, that is not a good dynamic for you. So we looked at the numbers. We understand location, except we did not have the depth of understanding to actually know what the numbers meant. Yeah. Right. And if we had taken the time and the effort to ask some questions, which is what I think we need to be doing more of in this industry as a whole, we would have understood that the numbers are not good. They are inverse from what we had expected because we looked at them only on their face. Yep.
And amazing point. And I think we could do a whole hour on leases. But I was trying to negotiate for my clients 8 years ago, a rent modulated based on sales.
Sure.
And a smaller environment. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that happening after the crisis that's been hit now, where people are forced to, there's been support in different places, but where people are still expected to pay rent.
Percentage, cap it. I will just tell everybody, percentage is smart unless you're really good at the marketing side and putting butts in seats. A lot of operators are good at controlling what's in the 4 walls and then being able to apply that versus driving butts to seats. If you're not good at the marketing, percentage makes sense. If you're good at the marketing, then you can drive more revenue. If you're good at top line versus bottom line.
But there's also a minimum, right? I had one of my clients put a clause where if within a year he wasn't hitting certain sales because they were claiming certain numbers, that he could get out of his lease, and he had an out for his lease.
You want to make sure that you have a cap, and to your point, you have a minimum, that they're invested in making sure that they're driving attention to that retail outlet, whatever that might be. You want to make sure that if you eat what you kill to some degree, because if you are not making sure that they are getting 3.75% of X and it's a multiple of this, and it changes the way your triple net and your CAM and these different things are organized, which is what would happen. You want to make sure that you aren't then paying them $12,000 on rent when really what rent would have been is $7,850 because of that percentage, because then that's a major loss for you. So just be weary of that because of the short-term, mid-term, and long-term of that. Make sure that you do have minimums and caps at the top so that you're in a sweet spot for yourself all the time, because then you'll start to brew animosity and they're like, well, that's what it is. It's this percentage. And then the relationship will start to break down. So you want to make sure that you're thinking long-term.
Well, that landlord relationship, like you say, lease landlord location, you want to do that, but I would cap it. But my point was for them, we don't know if this will work in this environment. You have free space. What if I'd rather them pay $3,500 for lease for rent than $7,000 if they don't have if that becomes 25% of their sales, that makes no sense and that's not viable. Let's do something that works for them to a certain extent where we can cap it. Anyways, I think we could do a long time. I see time flying by, but that was a really good point. Another one that I think you're a big fan of, or something that you push in some of your ideas that I've been pushing to all of my clients I've ever worked with, is a smaller menu is key to success. When I go to somebody and I say, we need to look at what you're selling and to streamline this, and they say, no, I'm going to add this, and I'm going to add chicken, and I'm going to buy this rotisserie, and I'm going to do rotisserie chicken on top of everything else we're doing, or this and that. And I tell them, less is more. And I think that's something that you like to speak of. Why do you think a smaller menu is key?
I think a focused menu is key. I've really been evolving even my thinking on that. It's focused, because smaller is saying that I think it needs to be a certain size. What I think it needs to be is the right size. And that is a series of questions of really understanding what value you're bringing, why you exist, who you are as a company, who you are as a team, and who you are when it comes to what's in the glass, what's on the plate, right? Again, who gets it to the plate. So I think it's just focus. You need to be able to be focused so that you can tell a better story, so that you can execute time and time again, so that you don't allow people, honestly, to pick losers. We do that too often. We are amazing at these 5, 7, 10 things, yet we have 20 things on the menu, and we just know that those other 10 things aren't as good. We say, well, we want to have something for everybody. Well, be known for something, or you'll be known for nothing. And too many places are known for nothing, and they cannot survive the inability to make sure that people are in the best possible opportunity for the quality that they have. And so you see this a lot, where somebody orders something that is absolutely the dish, and somebody orders something else that's just a dog. And then they get the dish, and two things happen. They don't like their dish. That is strike number one. Yep. And strike number 2 and 3 come in the next interaction. They taste the person's dish that's amazing and go, that's amazing. And they are really pissed now that they have the dog, because it's exponentially more insulting to them. How can this be so bad and that be so good? And you'd think that they tried the good dish and they go, I got to come back to get that dish. You lost them. Yep. You already lost them because of that dynamic. And that happens far too often in restaurants. So having the right size, being focused, being able to make sure that 80-20 rule, 80% of your guests are guaranteed to get themselves into the thing that you were the best at. And you will have some things that are slight outliers, or don't quite land with somebody. You got to make sure that the 80-20 rule is in your favor. The problem is usually we're good at 20% of the things we're putting out, and we're not good at 80% of them. And then we wonder why people are underwhelmed with us when we're only thinking about, but we do these burgers so good. Great, but only 40% of your sales are burgers. So 60% of your people aren't getting the thing that you're good at. So what the hell are we doing here?
Yep.
That's it.
I think it's an amazing point, and I like how you've flipped it from a smaller menu to a focused menu, and I totally agree with, because when it becomes too mixed up, too diverse, what happens is, even execution-wise, right? So freshness of food, inventory, ordering, it becomes more complicated. Training your team. If your team is proud of everything that comes out, I mean, if I'm pushing, and I've done it as a server, right? I'm pushing the dish that I love. I'm like, this is amazing. This pasta with this blah, blah, blah. And then I remember working in a restaurant where there was a seafood pasta, and it was crap. For the price, I'll sell you the spaghetti with the extra shrimp. Big, nice shrimp, juicy, beautiful. Same plate as the other one that has, 2 mussels and 2 clams in there. I don't think you should do it. But I don't want my servers. I don't want my team to go and do that. Let's do. And I love the way you brought it. Is like, let's do what we're good at. I always say the thing with restaurant is not doing things amazingly once. It's doing something really good 25,000 times and having that consistency. And I'd rather have things that we can throw out of the park every time. And I think this is such a key where a lot of people lack that focus, and it shows on the plate. It shows in the experience because they can't train the team, and they have too many products, too many beers, too many spirits, too many wines, too many things on the menu where it gets that learning curve. And we're going to talk, and I want to move through that, but we're going to talk about, the pillars and keeping your team, but training them and giving them the tools to perform is important. So I really love that you mentioned a focused menu is key. Before we go into a really, really amazing concept that I think we should spend the whole afternoon talking about, but I want to talk about your podcast. You, a few months ago, I believe at the beginning of, I don't know if it was related to COVID, and you can tell us, but you launched the Best Served podcast. It's on your website, but it's also mainly on Facebook is where you can find that. That's how I discovered you on, I guess, a very important, I saw you, I kept seeing you flying by, and then I'm probably going to say this poorly, but chef from Boston, Ming Tsai?
Ming Tsai, yeah.
That episode is the one that caught me where I started following you more and more. And basically you've been at this every day since, I guess, sometime in the spring. And I want you to tell us more about that. I really enjoyed the show. And that's how our relationship came about. And that's why you're here. But I want to hear about the pod. Why did you want to go there? How has been the experience? How many shows you've canned and what's coming up with that?
Yeah, I'll tell you the story in reverse a little bit. So we have been on as a live show with some pre-recorded, but basically I've been on Facebook, and now we're starting to be on YouTube, and we have been on every single day since March 18th. It absolutely was a COVID pivot that I said, we need to be real-time relevant, bringing value. I need to hustle and communicate for our industry because they're going to be struggling and hurting and needing to hear more voices and being reassured or being given the reality. And so there was a lot of that. So we have done 160 shows.
Nice.
March 18th, every single day, 7 days a week. We have not skipped a day. Even I went on vacation. We still did the show because I want to show up and be consistent for everybody out there, the people that we call #unsung hospitality heroes. That is who this show is for. It's everybody from dishwashers to butlers, bartenders, managers, farmers, like everybody that's a part of the ecosystem that matters. And so that's what we've been doing. The show started in November 18th. We started the show as just a audio podcast. And so I believe 37 episodes you can find on our website, as well as we're on Anchor. And Anchor came about, let's go back to Gary Vee. Anchor came about, I randomly was listening to a Gary Vee episode, and he was talking to Chase Jarvis, and they were talking about podcasts, and they said this Anchor thing. And I was like, what the hell is Anchor? Literally the next day, this is like September, I got on, I found Anchor. I was like, this is crazy. You can literally get on and just like start recording. I figured it out. And 5 weeks later, we had a brand and everything. And then we created a launch, and I did interviews through October to have kind of like, I think I had like 10 queued up so we can kind of get some momentum going. And we did about 2 a week, November, December, January, February into March. And the reason that I started the podcast is because I recognize that I am here to communicate. It's interesting. It says Chef Jensen Cummings right there. Like, I'm very media savvy. There's my handle. Go follow me. All of that, right? Yeah, I struggle sometimes. Am I still a chef? Because I'm not working 70 hours in the kitchen like I did for years and years and years. There was an almost 7-year span where I did not miss a single day of work. I did not take one sick day because I had to be the tough guy mentality person. And what I recognize now is like, I need to tell people that it's okay to take a day off. But look at me. I can't. I'm still not taking a day off for the podcast. So I don't know what it is. I'm struggling with it. Yet I still thought of myself and think of myself as a chef, and maybe I'm not, and maybe I always will be. I don't know. That is for you, for the audience to decide. What I recognized was I was no longer going to be in the kitchen. Yet I still had the ego and the bravado and the skill, I thought, to be able to like bring immense amounts of value to the people working within the hospitality industry. And so I said, you know what? Maybe I still can go to the Hall of Fame. It's not going to be as a player, but maybe it could be as a coach. Yeah. And so my mindset shifted, and I said, okay, how do I then be a leader still and somebody who's influencing the future of the industry and has my finger on the pulse? Yet I need to do it with a little more perspective, right? And so I said, okay, then media. I need to figure out a way to communicate and become media and be in it, yet be able to see the forest of the trees, because sometimes we can't when you're in the restaurant. And so I said, let's start this. And I wanted to get introduced to new people. And the reason for that was so important to me was because it's completely linear, binary for me. It's ones and zeros. You know that very well. Every single time that I've recognized as a leader in a restaurant, in a kitchen, in any of my businesses, when I recognize that I work for my team, we've succeeded because I was there to support and empower them. Every time that I got a little cloudy and a little fuzzy on my mission and thought people were lucky to work for me because of the accolades or the awards or the success, whatever that was, I failed. And so this was an opportunity to both just consume as much human stories as possible within our industry, which I'm so passionate about. It was also a way, because there was a lot of animosity brewing and labor shortages and culture issues were coming up a lot. I was like, we need to have more conversations. We're getting way too siloed. We're not listening. We're letting the server make up the spaghetti and add the shrimp because they hate everything about the seafood dish. And we're not asking questions of them. And then we're becoming two different brands in the way that we're representing. I saw a lot of that happening, and I wanted to atone a little bit. I needed to spend all my time meeting and being introduced to unsung hospitality heroes. Yeah. And so the full podcast, there's actually 2 guests on every episode. Our main guest, who's a leader in the industry, well-known, whatever that might be, and they were expected to give a shout out and acknowledgement. The word acknowledgement is now the bedrock of what we do. They were acknowledged somebody, and we had a second voice, their unsung hospitality hero, who they acknowledged was actually on their episode for just 10 minutes so we could contextualize the relationship. Because that person, most of them had never been invited to be a part of any type of media, anything. For me, I think they are as important, if not more important, than all the name brands in our industry. And so I really wanted to highlight them. And then what is happening, some of those second voices now have become guests on our show, that they get their own platform to speak to. And so we're trying to hold space for Ming Tsai, is one of the most famous people in our industry. He's a name brand. People know him really, really well. Farmer Lee Jones, Claudine Papin, Jacques Papin's daughter has been on the show. Edward Lee is an icon as well. They've all been on the show, and I'm very savvy to understand, like, they attract a Christopher Wells. They absolutely bring attention to us, who give me the opportunity to interview somebody like Amber Graff, who's a lunch lady at a school in Boulder, who's making scratch cooking for kids, who was a chef in our industry for a lot of years. I think what she's doing is way more important than what Ming Tsai is doing, potentially. And I want to create an opportunity to share their stories. And I need to do that through balancing the ability to leverage media and brands and their attention to be able to tell a multitude of stories. And it's one of the reasons we've been on every day, is because I need to make sure in any given week I'm focusing on getting people in that are exciting and have name brands, as well as people that I just think we need to be introduced to. Because if we spent more time acknowledging each other, we would not have rifts in our industry. We might not even have rifts in this country, because I truly believe that the more that we communicate, the closer that we come together. And you may not always agree, but if I've sat at a table with you, if I've had a bourbon or a sake with you, I may not agree with you, Chris, but I will never, ever be able to hate you. And there's too much of that animosity brewing. And I think it's because we're not, it can be like this. You and I, we may banter about stuff, and I might be like, look, I think the technology you're talking about is a hindrance. And you go, what the hell are you talking about? It's absolutely what we need in this industry. And it's like, I don't know. We may have that kind of interaction, but guaranteed, even though we've been face-to-face here, I can't hate you. It's an impossibility because we have communicated.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's, I've always judged when I worked on, until 2012, 2013, I worked still, on a floor in a restaurant as I was building my consultancy. But I judge you by how you treat the dishwasher. That tells me a whole lot about you and your personality, about how you treat
I got to tell you quick, and because I saw Paragon Pillars, we got to get in. The dishwasher, whoever the chef on duty was, which, whenever it was me, was the one person that you personally cooked a meal for at the end of service, right? All the other cooks, I'd be like, just fend for yourself, whatever. But it wasn't like leftover scraps. It was like you cooked them the best meal because they are the most important person in the building, period. Their work touches every single guest. Yep. Every guest interacts with a plate, with a fork, with a glass that has been touched by that dishwasher. They are the most important person. And I have learned some of the most monumental lessons from dishwashers because I was overthinking everything and they kept it really simple. And I said, yes, you're absolutely right. A lot of times
they're consistent and they're there and they're a core part of our team. I know that you managed to fit in time to come and do table 21 with me today. I said I would let you go a few minutes before 4. We are kind of there.
We got time. We pushed back a little bit. So let's go. We got to talk about the Paragon Pillars for a couple of minutes.
We have to, and maybe we need to do a whole other episode in a couple of weeks, but you have to tell us these Paragon Pillars that you've brought, because I think it is something that I want to help you push and I want to bring forth in the next couple of months. But please tell us, what are the Paragon Pillars?
Paragon Pillars were born out of the time around Slotted Spoon when, I had that business kind of fall apart a little bit and left that partnership, and a couple other businesses like fail because I'm a serial entrepreneur and I'm a futurist and I can't keep from going, which is why I do a show every day probably. What I recognize is the business model is not built for the viability of success. The opportunity to succeed in this industry, and we just throw things around like 60% of restaurants close in the first 12 months. Like it's just normal. That is not normal. There's nothing right about that. That is so wrong. Yet it's just like a thing that we accept. Our turnover rate in this industry is 73%. Pre-COVID, the average tenure of a restaurant employee, Chris, 56 days. It's a travesty. It's an embarrassment. And many of the things that I was doing were fueling the inequities of the way that we treat each other in the industry. And so, again, I wanted to atone for that. The Paragon Pillars, there was a simple goal that I had. I was like, imagine if in restaurants, the industry standard, the status quo, the norm became that a 65-year-old line cook was working their last month in the kitchen, getting ready to retire because they worked 45 years in a restaurant and they get the proverbial gold watch and a pension at the end of that. And they are able to retire and put 2.2 kids through college and all of the American dream, the international dream really, into play. Yet that doesn't happen. You don't see 65-year-old line cooks because we churn through people so quickly. So it's like, what do we need to do on both sides of the equation? The way we invest in human capital and creating viable business to be able to actually sustain and maintain and create the momentum and the capabilities to be able to get to that outcome goal. And so the Paragon Pillars, I was like, I need something that people can sink their teeth into that create a roadmap. I'm not saying that this is the way to do it, because what I also recognize is every decision for a business, for an individual, is unique and individual. And so it allows room for that. The two goals are for our industry at flow state to be able to maintain 75% employee retention and satisfaction. And again, when 73% is the turnover rate, to invert that, I think is so critical. And there's 4 ways that I see about going about that, and we can talk about that a little bit. It's wages, benefits, education, and culture. Those are the 4 pillars within that pillar of 75% employee retention and satisfaction. The second started, interestingly, as 20% net profit. And when 7% is the industry standard, again, ridiculous. Yet we're rebranding. We're going to 19%. Yeah. And I apologize, but
I wasn't sure how you were going to go about it. So
we're going to 19% because we're going to own COVID-19. That is where we're going to be. Yes, 19% is the new number because I want people to say we are going to endure this as well. The way that we can go about that is communication. Shocker. Surprise, surprise. Humans and communication, it's the whole game. Yep. If you look at a P&L an operating budget for a restaurant. You have 107, 112, 142 line items in that budget.
Yep.
We have looked at those linear and transactional for far too long. It is who has the leverage to get the price where you need the price to be. What I believe the opportunity is, and we see it playing out now, is how do we invest in an equitable, profitable, and sustainable model for restaurants? Because in this moment of COVID, you see that restaurants are fundamentally the pillars of their community and of commerce, right? The culture that we're creating in restaurants is a necessity. Restaurant employees are essential workers. It is an essential part of any community. We're seeing that more than ever. And a lot of things are playing out. So now when I think of my landlord, my website developer, my broadline food producer, my seafood food producer, anybody and everybody in that 107, 112, 145 line item budgets, those are the potential for partners to invest in the future of your restaurant, because all the ancillary services, products, and industries that maintain and are in need of restaurants to be able to sell their wares or their services have to have restaurants. And we cannot allow 7% to be the industry standard, because the viability of longevity of that is just not feasible. And so we need to say, as an industry and all the subset industries that feed into the restaurant, you have to get to 19% to be able to be viable. What can you do now, landlord, to not have my restaurant close in 12 months, 18 months, to have a vacant space for 9 months, to then recognize that commerce has also changed. I'll speak to our country. Commerce has changed here, where it used to be the mall and the JCPenney and the Sears that drove commerce, and you had a restaurant near there because you wanted the visibility, the demographics, and the traffic, right? Back to those notions. Now it's restaurants. You have a cool, hip, new neighborhood in Montreal. I know you have several. It's restaurants that drive all of the attention. They're building brands about that neighborhood, and it's restaurants. It's dynamic. It's cool bars. It's experiential that's driving that. The restaurant now is the anchor tenant. Yet we don't understand what that means in our ability to ask the landlord to invest in our success and future. We're signing the same leases that we did 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 30 years ago. We're signing the same leases. So what you need to understand is the yoga studio, the shoe boutique, the dog grooming place on the corner, those all fundamentally count on the restaurant to put butts in their seats, right? And so restaurants now are the anchor tenants. So now, instead of 10% being occupancy percentages, how do we get to 7.34? How do we then say, instead of buying at 12% your ground beef, how do we get into 9.8? And the investment in that is what needs to happen. It's creating a communication infrastructure. Imagine if you are forecasting and you're not going to hit 19%. And restaurants suck at forecasting, Chris. So like, we need to take ownership of that. We need to forecast and understand and be mindful of seasonality and understand the numbers. You're forecasting, you're like, we're going to be like 15.8, 15.9. We're not going to hit that number. And you go to your team, your partners, and say, team, we're 3% short on Q3. Who's got 3% for me? And somebody comes to you and says, you know what? We have this new initiative around this new sustainable seafood in Bristol Bay, and we can get you salmon for about $1.50 cheaper a pound for the next 6 months, as they're really looking to kind of penetrate the market. Okay, so if we move your salmon, because you guys, your number one selling item is your salmon, we move you this product for the next 6 months, and then that price will go up and we can figure out where you're at. There's a percent right there. And you find the money through partnerships versus being in this buyer-sellers mentality of like, who has the leverage, and now I'm going to inflict my will on you, and then it's going to come back around. So that is shifting the mindset from scarcity to abundance, from the communication infrastructure. And if you do that, you have an actual opportunity to get to 19%. And you know what? If you only get to 15%, and you say, Jensen, that's crazy, because people tell me I'm crazy all the time. If you don't get to 19% and you get to 15, if you get to 12, you're welcome. Like, because you were thinking about it differently and you were mapping to what's right for you. And that's really the goal. And the way that it allows us to invest in people is massive too. So I I'm monologuing here. Ask me a question, but I definitely have some stuff to talk to you about the other side of the pillars, the way we invest in people. But any thoughts on that you want to ask me?
Add one thing, because sometimes it's amazing. I mean, you and I could riff for the next hour on what you just said. But one thing, we talked about Gary Vee before, and the point I was going to make is that when I was on a call with him, I told him about the lack of traction with some of the videos I was doing, and he was like, rinse and repeat, Chris, rinse and repeat. And I love that that's what you've applied. So that's where I thought. But one terminology that I learned with him that I've been applying for years is reverse engineering. And if you want to achieve 12, 15, 17, 19%, I don't care how crazy it is. I think 19 is crazy because I've been helping people go from 3, 4 to 7.
Yep.
You say 19, I'm like, I'm going to have to cut a lot of hours in those schedule in that menu. We're going to have to reprice that menu. And hence, that's what took me to piecemeal to have your numbers and to be able to control that. But let's just do a small example, okay? And I know in the States, I think it's a lot smaller, but here, the average where I'm at, the salary for a server is $10. Okay, so instead of doing a schedule and hoping that your your labor cost for that week makes sense and allows us to go and be more profitable, and then hope and pray is never a solution, right? But if I'm doing 10,000 and I want to do 10% labor and service, that means I got $1,000 to spend. If my average salary is $10, I got 100 hours to put on my schedule. If your schedule comes out 122 hours, you're not going to make budget. So reverse engineering means this is what we want to achieve. This is how we need to get to it. If you've never costed your recipe, but you cost them and half of them are at 44% food cost, and you're trying to aim for 32, not going to happen, especially if they're on high selling items, right? So the point is that I love the concept behind what you're saying, but one of the ways to achieve it is reverse engineering. If when you sign the lease, you take the best case scenario for sales and that's at 7%, but you hit half of those sales, you're going to be at 12, 13, 14% on your lease, on your rent, and that's going to take away from you. And then you're not even at 3%, you might be at -2%. That's why restaurants fail within 12, 24, 36 months. But if you want to win, you go with what you have and you say, this is what I'm allowed to spend. Is a lot easier than analyzing the P&L on the 12th of the month, is making an action plan to make sure we achieve it. And I just wanted to make a little segue on that.
2 things on that. First, reverse engineering, just for something very practical for your audience too, is the model that we're on is we say, here's our food cost, and we do 3 times, 3.5, 4 times X is then what your menu price is. I very much am not a believer in that. What I believe in is pricing the market and then reverse engineering to create your costs. And so you need to really understand your leaders and your losers within that, because you have 15 items on your menu, you're always going to have the number 15 selling item. You're always going to have the worst selling item. And so you need to be aware of that. It doesn't mean it's a bad item. It just means that it's number 15 because something has to be number 15. So recognizing that, reverse engineering that. If the market bears $14 for that burger, yet your food cost puts it at, you would price it at 12. I see a lot of people charging 12. Another problem is the market bears 12 and you're charging 14. So you need to be very understanding of the market itself and what the value that you can actually pull from that item is, and then reverse engineer everything that you do from a costing standpoint. But we don't do that. We cost first and then go the other way. And so I want to be very aware of that. You might also have variable control costs. I'm a big fan of that. You might have your 1, 2, and 3 item have 25% food costs because they have a great ticket item because there's a lot of expectation in the market, and you sell so much of it, you have purchasing leverage that then allows you to buy your chicken thighs for 22 cents less a pound because you're buying 175 pounds 4 times a week versus 56 pounds twice a week. And now you have leverage there. And again, you're creating a partnership. So they're selling more of it, and you're creating the opportunity like big chains have of their buying in volume. You're creating that from, again, a smaller menu, a more focused menu. So that's one thing. The one thing I will push back on you on is I'm very much pushing people to an invest in growth mentality. We have been so often in a cut and control mentality that leads us to cutting our prime costs, which is our variable controls, which is food and labor, direct labor especially, being the #1 pain point for restaurants. What I think you're doing is you are undervaluing and you are cutting your most valuable asset, which is your people, and who gets it to the plate once again. And then it diminishes the value that goes to your guests, which is the second most important asset that a restaurant has. Your people are first and your guest is second, 100%. So what I really am driving restaurants to is to drive growth and investment in the things that matter to give you the most upside potential.
Yeah.
So what I want is a restaurant to not do $100,000 in a week. I want them to do 140,000. I want all of your focus to be on revenue and driving that. And I don't want them to think about 100 hours. I want to think about how do I deploy 200 hours to create $140,000 in revenue, right? So that's the mentality. And we've done a lot of things that I think disadvantage us because at its face, creating bonuses and incentives tied to performance, I think is important. I am a firm believer in managed seconds and pennies, yet controlling and cutting them is a very different thing. And we've seen this scenario play out in restaurants so many times where a junior manager is tied to labor. You're coming up on Sunday, you did not forecast, you did not plan, you were not on top of driving revenue, you were sitting back, you were being reactive instead of proactive, and you didn't get the numbers. You did not hit those numbers. On Sunday, you go, crap, what are we going to do? And you cut 4 staff members. Every single guest and every single employee that works that day will have a diminished experience. The end. And an impossibility for them to have the heightened experience that they should if you are at full strength for your staff, your internal guests, and your external guests. You now are losing money on that, yet you hit 9.2% because that's your target. That happens all the time because of the control mentality and because we're driving bad behavior versus if you drive sales to $120,000 and hey, our numbers are a little bit out of whack for now, driving top line sales, cures all. I don't think that that's true, but I think that driving a sales mentality and a growth mentality does. So that's one thing. The last thing that I want to leave you with is the 75% employee retention satisfaction. It is the more important of the 2 pillars. And what happens is there's 4 pillars within that: wages, benefits, culture, and education. And what I want is, first of all, you need to pay a livable wage. It's a ridiculous notion that people need to work more than full time within restaurants to be able to even have their 1-bedroom apartment. And it's an unfortunate reality that we need to come to terms with. I don't think that means $15 minimum wage always. I don't think that means universal wage. I don't think that means equal pay. I think it does sometimes. I think it's dependent on your market, which is, again, the fluidity and flexibility within the model we're creating, because it's about understanding every single lever and being able to invest where it's most important for you, for your market, for your community, for your team, for your business, and then adjusting therein. And so if you needed to spend X on your salmon, well, then you probably can't spend as much on the light fixtures that are shaped like salmons and nobody gives a shit about, but we spend all this money on, and it's asinine to me. Anyway, wages, you need to pay wages that is a livable wage, whatever that means within your market, however you organize that. Benefits is another important thing we see that people are absolutely needing and wanting and expecting. That culture and education are 2 things as well that we see high demand, and creating longevity and retention is absolutely more often actually coming from education and culture than it's coming from wages and benefits. What I want a restaurant to do is say, here's our model. We're $1 million restaurant. Every quarter, we invest an additional $5,000 on top of our flow state payroll, of our flow state investment in our people, into our people. You involve your team and say, hey, everybody, we know the model. We know that on average in our country, if I pay somebody $50,000, what I'm actually investing in the bottom line is $75,000. It's a little bit less, but basically thinking about payroll taxes, workman's comp, thinking about unemployment insurance and hedging against that. So I'm at 1.5. It's probably more like 1.37, but anyway, that's what I'm budgeting. So if we have $5,000, I could put all that in wages, but we have transparency with our team, and so that you're not going to see all $5,000 between our 20 people. You're going to see the inverse of that because the $5,000 will also cover our 1.5 investment. And they go, you know what? I have a livable wage. You're paying half of my health insurance and includes dental and vision. I'm really happy with that. How about we invest in a butchery class? How about we invest in a trip to Japan to go sake tasting because we're a sushi restaurant in Los Angeles? How about we invest in that? Obviously, $5,000 isn't enough to take your team there, but that's the motto is, you know what? Let's hold on to that. Let's save all of our money this year and go on a trip at the end of the year and include our, team building holiday party in that as well. So that's what you can do. You create transparency, you create an investment model, you allow for understanding that these 4 pillars are the places that there's going to be the opportunity and the need to invest. And then you involve your team to invest that properly. And because they have an understanding, they have a little bit of their own control. They're not being controlled all the time, and can invest in themselves in a way that makes sense for them individually and for the team. And that's how you create an opportunity for longevity.
I think that's amazing. I would love to do another 2 hours with you, because you said we might not agree on everything. And I don't completely agree with the cost cutting, because, and my point there, and we can come back to that conversation, is that a lot of times if people are not making money at 100 grand, even though you want to push them at 140, the recipe that's helping them not make money at 100 grand will not help them make money at 140. And I've seen that too often.
Absolutely.
That's where I think sometimes you need to step back to jump higher, jump further.
That's why I mentioned seconds and pennies. I manage seconds and pennies. For me, it's in the investment and growth. You still make sure that you're at the 10%. The way you go about it, the mentality that we've instilled, that's part of the issue. And so I think shifting the mindset from scarcity to abundance really, really matters. You still do the same thing you're talking about. It's in the order of operations and the prioritization of the way that you go about that.
Yep.
Problem is, we never are empowering, not often enough, I should say, empowering people to figure out a way to get to 140. We're only empowering them to cut down to 100 hours. And I think you need both in equal measure. And that's part of the equation, is that it's not one or the other, it's both. And we need to understand that there is the opportunity for both. We just haven't given ourselves enough opportunity for that.
Totally. Chef Jensen Cummings, it was an honor and a pleasure to have you on the first edition of Table 21. I think you and I, even though we are about 5,000 kilometers away, have a lot of things in common, and we're probably going to meet each other again and come across each other. I want to invite everybody, if they enjoyed this conversation and they want to meet unsung hospitality heroes and people in the industry, to check out the Best Served podcast on Facebook. Go check that out. You can also follow Jensen at Chef Jensen Cummings, but check out his pod. Really something that I'm happy to have, and I love to see what you guys do every day. It was an honor to have you on. I wish you a good, continued success with what you're doing. I think you're doing some amazing work that needs to be done in this industry, and that you're putting people forward in a great way. And people will see that when they listen to an episode. It's not even like today was about you. I wanted to talk about you and find out and learn more about you. But on these shows, you are amazing at putting those people forward, their ideas, what they do. You're a great listener, a great interviewer, I must say. And it was an honor to have you on this first episode. I want to wish you an outstanding day. Thanks for everybody for listening. And hopefully I will bug you in a while to probably come back and we can push further in the Paragon Pillars, because I think you're onto something really good that can help and help our industry get better. So thank you so much.
All right. Cheers. Appreciate you.
Take care, Jensen. Bye, everyone.